Well, here we are, session number 9 of Micah, looking at the last 4 verses of chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. We want to always keep in mind something we've talked about last couple times, and that is that prophets who were true prophets of God were often despised and even killed when they cried out concerning the coming judgment of God on the nation. People did not want to hear that. They wanted, as Paul said in Timothy, they wanted their ears tickled, not burned. We get a couple examples where they were not appreciated. I'm looking at Amos. Again, he was a southern boy, but a boy out of Judah, who ended up in the northern kingdom preaching judgment on the northern nation. He didn't take it quite as far as Hosea did and explain to them that their beloved nation would never exist after judgment. So anyhow, instead of rambling on, let me go back to Amos 5, verse 10. And he is talking to the northern kingdom, where it says, "They hate him who reproves in the gate." This is Amos writing. Of course, he has faced that himself. They hate him who reproves in the gate, and they abhor him who speaks with integrity. He says, I come in here and I start speaking what God tells me to speak. You're going to hate me. You're going to reprove me. You're going to try and get me out of here. Anything you can do to get rid of me. Well, Jeremiah had similar kinds of problems, different but similar. And right in Jeremiah 26, looking at verses 11 and 12. Then the priests and the prophets spoke to the officials and to all the people, saying, a death sentence for this man. Now, who is this? It's all the people saying, kill Jeremiah, for he has prophesied against this city. And yes, he had prophesied doom and destruction for Jerusalem. For he has prophesied against this city, as you have heard in your own hearing. They said, we don't take our word for it, you heard it yourself. And it probably was true. Then, verse 12, Jeremiah spoke to all the officials and to all the people, saying, Yahweh sent me to prophesy against this house and against this city. So he said, the Lord Yahweh sent me to prophesy against Judah and in particular against Jerusalem. All the words that you have heard. He said, God gave me those words. They're not my words. I didn't make it up. And if we drop down to verse 18, Jeremiah goes back and reminds them of something Micah had done 120, 30, 40 years earlier. Verse 18 of Jeremiah, what chapter are we in again? 26. So this is 26:18 of Jeremiah. Micah of Moresheth prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah. So he's saying, go back to Hezekiah's time. This Micah of Moresheth was prophesying during his reign. And he spoke to all the people of Judah, saying, so Jeremiah is saying he talked with us, folks. He talked about both north and south, but he was talking to us. And he spoke to all the people of Judah, saying, thus Yahweh of hosts has said, Zion will be plowed as a field. Now, Zion, of course, is a synonym for Jerusalem. So he just said, this place is not going to be a city, it's going to be a field. It'll be leveled. And Jerusalem will become ruins. So those two verses, again, there's the parallelism, saying the same thing two different ways. And he doesn't quit there. And the mountain of the house as the high place of a forest. Remember, what did the high places usually symbolize? Pagan worship. So he was saying the mountain of the house, which is Jerusalem, that the main place of Judah, is going to be treated as if it were a pagan place of worship. Even Paul spoke of this over 600 years later in 2 Timothy 4:3, and it's one we read last time. For the time will come when they, that's many of the people, will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers, that'd be prophets too, in accordance to their own desires. So 600 years later, they're still saying the same kind of thing. These people don't want to hear about judgment. They don't want to hear anything negative. If you want to be one of their teachers, preachers, you better make it good. Micah began this segment of his indictment, if you remember back, by making it crystal clear, knowing, I'm confident that he knew, that it could cost him his life. You can find places in Scripture where it talks about prophets who were killed. I forget exactly now where it is. We could find it pretty quickly with either a search software piece or concordance. We could find it fairly quickly. Now Micah winds up his indictment of the leaders. That's what we're going to do today in these last 4 verses. Essentially returning to the original group of rulers. At least it seems to me that that's the kind of thing he's talking about. Now, would this apply to the religious rulers? Maybe, but definitely to the ruling elite. Verse 9. So here we go, and I'm going to do 9 and 10 together. Now hear this, heads of the house of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel. There's that parallelism again. He said, those of you who are responsible for leading this nation, who abhor justice and twist everything that is straight. By the way, those two also are parallel. Those who abhor justice twist everything that is straight. Remember we talked last time, what he's saying here again is, all you guys who are in charge, you have no love of justice. You twist everything that's supposed to be straight. Evil is treated as if it were good. Good is treated as if it were evil. Verse 10, who build Zion with bloodshed. Who build Jerusalem with bloodshed. So you hate justice. You do not rule fairly. You twist everything, and you use violence and bloodshed as part of it. And here, who builds Zion with bloodshed? Here's its parallel. And Jerusalem with violent injustice. So in a sense, there are 6 lines in 9 and 10, 3:9, 3:10. There are 6 lines. The first 2 are given to parallel statements about who he's talking to. The second 2 are the same statement twice about what the problem is, and then the last 2, an extension expanding on how this is being done. Again, the house of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel say the same thing. The nation and its ruling class are the focus of this last segment of the indictment. Abhor justice, twist everything straight. Again, same claim made as the poet is on a kick of the use of parallelism to bring error to the fore. And in the third parallelism, Judah's ruling class is charged with bloodshed and violent injustice. So he's summing everything up by a triple of parallels. Micah had made it very clear that the ruling elite were acting both with intent and evil behavior. Remember what he said? On your bed at night you plan this, in the morning you get up and do it. The target of their evil behavior, the vulnerable among the people of Judah. The rulers dominate with power versus the people who have no earthly assets with which to fight. Let's look at verse 11. Her, that's Judah's again, leaders pronounce judgment for a bribe. We talked a bit about that. We'll do some more. Her priests, now we're going, besides ruling leaders, now we're going to include the religious side. Her priests instruct for a price, and her prophets divine for money. So he's going back and reminding them of what he's already taught. Yet they lean on Yahweh. There's some kind of pretense here. These rulers and these religious leaders lean on Yahweh, saying, is not the Lord in our midst? Calamity will not come upon us. Do you remember that? And we'll probably see it again. It's somewhere in Jeremiah, I think about chapter 7, where Jeremiah says, hey, look at you guys. You're saying, oh, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, which is just a way of saying, you know, that's like a magic charm, a good luck charm. You're saying that since the temple's here, nothing bad can happen, because who's in the temple? The Lord. Well, the Lord told them, watch this as I leave the temple. And of course, that invited Nebuchadnezzar to come in and destroy everything. So he said, you're saying God's here, you're in the temple, yeah, God's here, nothing's going to happen to us. And Micah saying, you want to bet? The law was quite explicit about bribes. So notice all these guys are on the take, both religious and secular leaders. They're all on the take. And by the way, technically in Judah, there was supposed to be no separating between religious leaders and secular leaders. The secular leaders were to lead in a way compatible with God's instruction, although they were not permitted to do any of the actions of the celebration rites of sacrificing, festivals and that sort of thing. But back in Exodus, all the way back in Exodus, when they're just coming out of Egypt and gone through Sinai and have, because they got the law started with the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20, as I recall. So in Exodus 23, verse 8, Moses is writing about the law at Sinai. You shall not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of the just. He says bribes don't do anything but mess up law and order, freedom, justice. Deuteronomy 16:19 also spoke to it. You shall not distort justice. You shall not be partial. You shall not take a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. So the first verse in Exodus said it blinds the eyes, period, even if you're trying to do properly. And here it says, I don't care if you're wise or if you're righteous. In either case, a bribe can still subvert what you should be doing. So don't do it. 2 Chronicles 19:7, which would be later during the times of the kings and the nation itself, after the split even. Then let the fear of the Lord, let the fear of Yahweh be upon you. Be very careful what you do, for Yahweh our God will have no part, what? In unrighteousness or partiality or the taking of a bribe. So in 2 Chronicles 19:7, he says, look, God's not going to have any piece of that action except judgment. Proverbs 17:23. A wicked man receives a bribe from the bosom to pervert the ways of justice. So Proverbs, Solomon writing, says, the purpose of a bribe is to pervert justice. If you take a bribe, understand that's what you're being asked to do, or told to do if you take it. Isaiah 5:23. Who justified the wicked for a bribe? He's talking about people leading improperly, and take away the rights of the ones who are in the right. So what's he saying? Wicked, when you have a bribe involved, justification appears to favor the wicked and take away the rights of those who are not. So it turns evil to good, good to evil, turns everything upside down, topsy-turvy. The ruling elite was expanded to include the religious leaders, as we saw just a moment ago when we read it. Both priests and false prophets come in. So Micah's wrapping this indictment up, but he's reminded them there are 2-3 different groups of people we're talking about. The prophets who spoke to the people with words from God. Well, they were the ones who were being hammered on, told to shut up. The priests whose purpose was to direct worship and intercede with God on behalf of the people. So, those prophets who spoke to the people substituted the words from God by words they created themselves after being bribed. Remember the filled my mouth sort of comment last time? And then the priests who were supposed to direct worship and intercede with God on behalf of the people weren't doing that. They were asked for their palms to be greased also. So everybody, the governmental leaders, the prophets, the priests, were all doing things for their own gain. Even the religious leadership was in it for the money, both prophet, false prophet, and for priests. And all the while, those leaders claimed God was okay with what was going on. He's here among us in the temple. So they'd cry, peace, peace. God, what's God going to do against us? There's nothing. There was only violence coming. Remember, Babylon was on their way. Violence, killing, social injustice. It had already started with these leaders, through these leaders, even before Babylon gets there. God's on our side, all is well, they said, over and over and over again. The priests questioned what was taken to be rhetorical with an expected answer of yes. That's what the question about priest was to be. But once earlier, a misplaced confidence was shown in the Israeli scriptures. 1 Samuel 4:3, going way back to David. Remember, we're hundreds of years after David. 1 Samuel 4:3. When the people came into the camp, and this was at Shiloh after a defeat by the Philistines. So they've just come from being whipped by the Philistines. They come back to Shiloh. And the elders of Israel said, "Why has Yahweh defeated us today?" They knew that if they were defeated by a set of Gentiles, that it was God's doing. Why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? They knew the Philistines were involved, but they knew the defeat came from Yahweh. Why, they said. Let us take to ourselves from Shiloh. Now watch this. Let us take to ourselves from Shiloh the ark of the covenant of Yahweh. Remember, it was in the Holy of Holies, in the tabernacle. There was that Shiloh at that time, that it may come among us. Let's bring it out among us. And notice, if they went into the Holy of Holies to get to the Ark of the Covenant, God said, you're going to die. Well, somebody went in and got it and brought it out. It said that it may come among us and deliver us from the power of our enemies. What was going to deliver them? God? No, the presence of the Ark of the Covenant. Well, of course, they thought that meant that God was there in the Ark. That was where he resided before the temple. But this was an improper belief that the Ark would deliver them safety, security, and victory. The Ark had no such power. The Ark itself had no power of any sort. All power to deliver belonged to God. But they were saying, oh, okay, if we got the Ark here, we got God here on our side. Not so. And remember another example similar to this, the serpent on the pole during the wilderness wanderings. Remember, God said a plague of serpents that were biting them, and of course, they got bit by one of them, they'd likely die. Well, then he put this serpent on the pole. That's what God told Moses to do. Make an image. Moses, put it on the pole, hold it up. Anybody who in faith looked to the pole would not die from a serpent's bite. Well, the pole had no power. The serpent on the pole had no power. All power was God's, executed through the people's faith in him and what he said you had to do. But look what happened a few hundred years later. I'm going to go now from the serpent on the pole in Exodus and Numbers, one of the two of them. I'm going all the way to 2 Kings 18, verses 3 and 4. And this is King Hezekiah. So this could have been about the time that Micah was prophesying, right? And King Hezekiah did right in the sight of the Lord. Remember, Hezekiah was one of the 3 or 4 good kings after David. And he was one of the good kings after the split. The second one, I think, first one was Uzziah, maybe. According to all that his father David had done, he did right in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father David had done. And he was a descendant of David, Hezekiah was. All these kings up to the captivity, Babylonian captivity, were offspring of David. He removed the high places. There we are again, talking about pagan places of worship. And broke down the sacred pillars, which served as symbols and altars and so forth. And cut down the Asherah, another set of poles that used for worship. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. Now, so here we're back, and Hezekiah broke into pieces that bronze serpent. It had been preserved. Now look at the last bit of this verse. For until those days the sons of Israel burned incense to it. So they were worshiping this bronze serpent. It went from being something to look at in faith to prevent death by serpents to something being worshipped, and it was called Nehushtan, Nehushtan. So that serpent was kept, that bronze serpent that Moses made, it was a made graven image, was kept, it was kept, by the way, in the temple, tabernacle first, temple later, and it was given a name in worship, Nehushtan. There was a mother of one of the evil kings whose name was almost identical to Nehushtan. I forget what it was, but she was named after that snake. Micah, through the Holy Spirit and with his eyeballs wide open, knew mo better than the people and the rulers. They knew more better than they did about what God was planning. Micah's plea was against the leaders, while a similar plea by Habakkuk several years later. I got later in my notes, but no, this would have been later too. This was just prior to Babylon's coming in and destroying them. So Habakkuk, let me read you something from Habakkuk. Now, Habakkuk is one of the good guys again. He's a prophet. He's speaking the words of God. But he starts his book saying, I see Judah going down the tubes. Violence, evil everywhere. And I know who Yahweh is. I know a lot about Yahweh. But I can't reconcile what I see with what he's permitting. So here we are. He's going to take this complaint, this concern, directly to God in Habakkuk 1, verses 2, 3, and 4. How long, O Yahweh, will I call for help, and you will not hear? I cry out to you, violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look on wickedness everywhere I look? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. I see it. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore, what is the result? The law is ignored. Justice is never upheld, for the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. What's he saying? I see all this crud going on, Lord, and I can't see you doing squat about it. That's his complaint. He's talking to God this way. And he laid bare the coming consequences of the leader, Micah does, of the leader's evil behavior. Now, Habakkuk, and made this complaint. What happened? Well, God's going to come back and say, hey, you're looking in the wrong places, Habakkuk. If you look around the right places, you'll see what I'm going to do and what I am doing, what I have been doing, and I'm going to tell you out to your face what I'm planning to do. But you better hold on, because you're not going to like it, because it's judgment. And of course, Habakkuk was trying to tell God, look, God, you need to discipline Judah so she'll turn around, repent, and come back to you and be the nation you expect. God says, don't sweat it. I got it under control. Well, Micah laid bare the coming consequences of the evil behavior of the leaders too, which is what God was going to do through Habakkuk by telling Habakkuk. Let's go to verse 12, the last verse in chapter 3, Micah 3:12. Therefore, on account of you, he's talking to the leaders, he's zapping upside the head with a 2x4, Zion will be plowed as a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins. That's essentially, again, two different statements doing the same thing. Zion was the hill outside Jerusalem. Zion is a synonym for Jerusalem. So it said Jerusalem's going to look like a plowed field. It won't be a city. It won't look like a city. Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins, and of course it was when Nebuchadnezzar was finished. And the mountain of the temple, that's the high spot in Judah, religious-wise, Yahweh praise-wise, that was where his presence was. The mountain of the temple will become high places for a forest. What's he saying? The temple's going to be wiped out. This way, place will become a place for pagan worship. Zion and Jerusalem, again, synonyms. This goes back, it was originally called Zion. And read in 2 Samuel 5:7, excuse me, nevertheless, David captured the stronghold of Zion, and this was from, I believe, the Gibeonites that Joshua had been tricked in to giving them an agreement of safety as they were become slaves then to the Jews or to the Israelites, but they would be protected from outsiders themselves by the Israeli government. So let me start again. Nevertheless, David captured the stronghold of Zion, that's Jerusalem, who was under the control of the Gibeonites. That is the city of David, which is, of course, a synonym for Jerusalem. So that's how Jerusalem became, and Zion are connected. Different names for Jerusalem at different times in its history. The city was going to be totally destroyed by Babylon in 586 BC. Now, remember that Micah is prophesying back in the 720s. So this is like 140 years before this prophecy takes place is when Micah also, Micah's a shortened version, right? That Micah was prophesying. Micah spared some of the detail that came later, but he said it's going to be totally destroyed, won't be recognizable as a city. Now, Habakkuk back in there, the guy who was confronting God about God's inaction in the face of evil being perpetrated in Judah, he wasn't spared the detail, as Micah has, as he charged God with inaction in the face of national evil. God laid the future with more detail than Habakkuk wanted to hear. Let me give you just a part of that in Habakkuk 1, verses 5, 6, and 7. So this is right after Habakkuk's God in God's face laid the charge of inaction to God. Although he admitted he knew who God was and didn't understand. So he was laying this charge because he didn't understand. And now we're going to look at God's response to him. God's going to say to Habakkuk, look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days. You wouldn't believe it if you were told. That's God talking to Habakkuk. Say, man, you in my face, let me describe the truth for you. Verse 6, for behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians, that fierce and impetuous people. In other words, these guys are the most evil at this time. God was strengthening them through some process so that they would even take out Assyria, who took out the northern kingdom and tried to take out Judah, except for God's direct intervention. For I am, behold, again, verse 6, behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people, who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They're conquering and taking it in as their own, something of value. Verse 7, they are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. In other words, they have no limits to what they're willing to do because they believe what they do is right. Like Job, Habakkuk shut his mouth and ended his charge against God too. Remember, he said he wanted God to tell him exactly what's going on because he didn't understand why everything was happening to him as it was. But his misery was part of God's will. God had a purpose in it. But in doing so, Job did remain faithful, just as Habakkuk remained faithful. Both of them put their hands over their mouth, shut their mouth, and listened to God and did as he directed. They remained faithful. They trusted him to do what was right. The temple now was going to be destroyed right along with the city, leaving only pagan shrines as places of worship. God-approved worship, therefore, would no longer be possible. Captivity and exile would remove Israelites from the temple, from proper worship, and from their God-assigned land. They had nothing that connected them with God physically left. They had no way to worship him as God insisted they do it. And centuries earlier, Samuel told the nation and Saul, listen to this. This is 1 Samuel 15:22. And Samuel said, actually he's going to question, has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Rhetorical question, right? And his expected answer is no, no, no. He doesn't take delight in the burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as he wants you to be obedient. Your behavior in obedience is more important than sacrifice and offerings. The sacrifices and offerings are supposed to help you in that process, but they weren't the basis of the process. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. There's that parallelism again. Obey is better than sacrifice. God would rather have you obedient than worrying about a sacrifice. And that you would pay attention to him more than you would give the fat of rams in sacrifice. Saying the same thing in both cases. Well, we're at the end of chapter 2. We're at the end of the indictment. We see who is indicted. First oracle, the people and their own behavior was indicted. In the second oracle, it is the governing rulers and the religious leaders who are indicted. And in the coming chapter, he's going to give a famous, often quote parallel to this, what we just read from Samuel. And there's another psalmist who jumped in a similar idea in Psalm 51, verse 17. The sacrifices of God, and here he's really implying the right sacrifices of God. The sacrifices of God prefers are a broken spirit, a broke and a contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. And Micah is going to say in, I think it's chapter 5, essentially the same thing. It'll be, he's going to answer the question, what does God expect of you? And there are only going to be 3 major points. As a matter of fact, most of you, I'm sure, have seen that verse and have heard the implications of it. By the way, there's a yet later example of misplaced trust. We mentioned it earlier. Actually look at the scripture now to verify that what I told you then was in keeping with the word. What is it? Trust that the temple's existence provided guaranteed safety. That is the error. What was it that we read earlier about? The trust in the ark as giving them safety and victory. But here, it's going to be not the ark, but the temple, in which, of course, the ark did reside prior to that, or during this time it was still there. And this is Jeremiah 7:4. It says, do not trust in deceptive words. In other words, this is sort of telling them, look, you guys, what you've been doing isn't the way. You're trusting in deceptive words. And let me tell you what those words are that you're trusting in. This is the temple of Yahweh. The temple of Yahweh. The temple of Yahweh. He said, don't think of the temple as a good luck charm. And that it's going to ward off all trouble simply because it's here. And that your behavior patterns don't have anything to do with how God decides to act. Don't go there. It's not right. And remember what God did? He said, you got your confidence in the temple because I'm there? I'm going to walk away from this temple, then see what happens. Well, Micah's finished with both the call to listen and the indictment for judgment. In the next 2 chapters, breathe easier, because we're going to see Micah's expansive explanation as to why there is hope in God. It looks like judgment's coming. It will. There's going to be destruction. There's going to be pain. There's going to be misery. There's going to be pain, suffering. All that's coming, yes. But there is very significant hope for the future for the remnant. So hang around there. We'll start that long, long series on hope